end of the 8th parak. We're in Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis. Got a lot of interesting things that the commentaries talk about here, and we've touched upon. The first issue that we were dealing with, or one of the issues I should say that we were dealing with, is that the Gemara had said you don't have to go after a fire on Saturday night. That if you have it, good. If you don't have it, it's okay. You don't have to bend over backwards to try to get fire. So one of the questions that's asked in the commentaries is, does this apply to Yom Kippur as well? Is this a rule that only would apply to Shabbos? Should you go through effort to get a candle on Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur, it's a little more complicated, actually, because on Yom Kippur, you cannot just light a fire if you don't have Havdallah, according to many opinions. According to many opinions, on Yom Kippur, you need to have a fire that burned throughout Yom Kippur. And I once had a big problem because I lit a yahrzeit candle before Yom Kippur, and it was one of those 24-hour candles, 25, 26-hour candles, but it went out before I got home to say Havdallah. So I had an issue of not being able to say Havdallah on Motzei Yom Kippur with the fire, because my fire went out. And on Yom Kippur, after Yom Kippur, you can't just light a match and light a Havdallah candle, at least according to some opinions. So I went to shul. The shul had a number of candles that people had used for yahrzeit candles, and those candles were still lit. So those were an option to use such a candle for to light from it for Havdallah. And if I remember correctly, I think we went to shul to say Havdallah there. So the question is, to what extent do you have to go after reciting Havdallah? Would you really have to do that? Would you have to go to your neighbor who still has a yahrzeit candle lit from Yom Kippur and use that for Havdallah? Or do you not have to go after a fire for Havdallah? In other words, is the law regarding Shabbos applicable to Havdallah as well? And the Ramban explains over here that the candle of Havdallah is a candle which is a Berachas Hashevach. You're praising Hashem about the light that comes out of a flame. Now, during the week, you don't normally say, you would not say such a bracha. And the reason is because you're constantly using light during the week. And on Motzei Shabbos and on Motzei Yom Kippur, where you were not allowed to utilize fire, so now it's something new to you, and therefore you can recite a bracha on it. In other words, logically, you may say, well, you want to praise Hashem even during the week for such a fire, but because it's a pleasure that you constantly have, so therefore the bracha would not be recited on it. The term is tashmishay tadir. It's used always. You have fire throughout the week. It's only on Motzei Shabbos, Motzei Yom Kippur, where you're now allowed to have something new that you would praise Hashem for fire. Now, you don't have to go after a thunder and lightning to go say a bracha, or to go see the ocean to say a bracha, even though that's a bracha of praise. So you don't have to run after the fire for Havdallah. Now, according to this reason, he seems to put Yom Kippur and Shabbos in the same category. And that would mean that Yom Kippur and Shabbos are the same. You don't have to run after a candle for Yom Kippur either. It's just like you don't have to go to the ocean to go say a bracha when you see the ocean. You don't have to go after the thunder and lightning. You don't have to go after a fire on Motzei Shabbos or Motzei Yom Kippur. The Raavad argues, and he says that on Havdallah of Motzei Shabbos, you don't have to go after a candle. But Havdallah after Yom Kippur, you should go after. You do have to go out of your way to get a candle. And the reason of the Raavad would be that the purpose of Havdallah on after Yom Kippur is different than the purpose of Havdallah, the purpose of the fire after Shabbos. In other words, the fire after Shabbos is one reason. It has to do with creation. It's really a bracha about that Hashem created at this moment. He created fire. That was when the creation of fire took place. But the bracha after Yom Kippur is more about the fact that you had no access to using fire, and being that it has a different reason behind it. It would therefore not, just because you don't have to go after fire for Shabbos, after Shabbos, it wouldn't apply that same reason to Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, there is reason to maybe go after a fire because you're not reciting the bracha just because fire is created on Saturday night. You're going after fire because now it's became permissible to use fire, emphasizing the difference of the Havdallah between Yom Kippur and the weekday, emphasizing the difference between or between Yom Kippur even in other holidays. So it's something more than just the bracha of praise of Hashem, and because of that, there may be a reason that you should go after the Havdallah fire after Yom Kippur. So that would be one point to mention over here. The next question is, what about Besamim? The Gemara only mentions you don't have to bend over backwards to get a fire for Havdallah. But what about a Besamim for Havdallah? If you don't have spices, should you go and knock on your neighbor's door to get spices for Motzei Shabbos, for Havdallah? Do you need to get spices? So the Gemara only mentioned about the candle. So one of the commentaries says that for sure, if you don't have to go after a candle, spices is much less of an obligation. Maybe that's why it doesn't even mention it in the Gemara, because spices is just to benefit, just for your own benefit, that you lost the soul of Shabbos. So for your benefit, yeah, you have spices. Go after you have to run somewhere to benefit. Here it's more like a special bracha. You're saying a praise of Hashem about fire. The Besamim is meant for your own personal benefit. So if you don't have to run after the bracha for the fire, for sure you don't have to run after spices, right? It would be logical. So that would seem to be the understanding, that you don't have to run. The spices is an extra thing, and you don't have to run after spice. And the reason the Gemara doesn't mention it because it's obvious. The Gemara is saying a bigger innovation, a bigger chidush, a bigger something unique that you don't even have to, even the fire you don't have to, for sure the spices you don't have to go after. So that's one way of understanding the Gemara. The only thing is, the Meiri says that although you don't have to go after fire, you do have to go after spices. So he flips it around. In other words, logic tells you that you wouldn't have to go after spices, but he says no, you do have to go after spices. And the reason for the spices is it's not just for your benefit, it's to emphasize to the world that there's an extra neshama. It's to emphasize, it's to bring out that idea, or to emphasize to you about the extra neshama. So it's part of the Havdallah. It has an element in it that's emphasizing the uniqueness of Shabbos. And because of that, it fits. It's crucial to the Havdallah, and therefore you should go out of your way to get besamim. So that's an interesting point that is mentioned in one of the Gemara commentaries. Now, the interesting thing is what does the halacha say? In other words, these are commentaries on the Gemara. What is the final verdict when it comes to halacha regarding these two things, regarding fire and for Yom Kippur, and regarding besamim. So it says ein machzirin al ha'ar. You don't have to go out of your way to get fire. If you have it, good. But Mitzvah Yom Kippur, some say you should go after it. So it brings the view of the Ramban. So it brings the view of the Ramban for Havdallah. Now, if we take a Shulchan Aruch,
Rebbe, the language it uses, ein machzirin, you don't go back. What's the chazara here? You're going out of your way. It's not going back someplace. Usually when you have to repeat something or whatever, you use a term like that.
Yeah, my understanding is that you're sitting down or standing up by your table, ready to make Havdallah, and you realize you don't have this thing. So are you obligated to go away from where you are to in other words, you got everything already for Havdallah. You got it all prepared. Now you have to go back to get something else that you forgot. That's my understanding of the terminology, machazrin. It's just a thought. I don't know. I didn't see any commentaries on the word, but okay. So we wanted to get a Shulchan Aruch here for the laws of besamim. What do you have to go out of your way to get besamim? So let me pull off the Shulchan Aruch. So Dine Besamim for Havdallah, the laws of Besamim. The Hinhigu Chachamim, the rabbis accustomed us. They gave us a custom that we should smell Besamim lohashiv as hanefesh, to return the soul, because of we lost the neshama, to calm the soul, because it feels bad that it lost that extra neshama, and we are mesameach it with reach toiv. And when does this apply? If you have if you have spices, then you have to smell them. But if you don't have, ein tzarech lachzor achareihem, you don't have to go after them like you would go after a mitzvah, since their purpose is only lahashiv es hanefesh. It's only to bring, to bring comfort to the soul. So the halacha does not follow that meiri. Again, the Meiri said that it's not just to bring comfort to your soul, but to emphasize that on Shabbos you had an extra neshama. And so you need to smell besamim, even if you don't need a fire, but you need besamim because it's part of the Havdallah mitzvah of emphasizing that you lost the soul. That's the Meiri. That's a point mentioned in the Meiri, and it's not brought, at least in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. I don't have the Mishnah Berurah in front of me, so I can't tell you what the Mishnah Berurah says. But in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, he doesn't bring the Meiri.
What about on Yom Kippur?
Oh, so tough reish Havdallah. I need a other Shulchan Aruch. That would be in chapter 624. Regarding Yom Kippur,
That must be in the third section.
If a person makes Havdallah on a cup with wine on Mitzvah Yom Kippur, you don't have to recite the bracha because it was only established on Mitzvah Shabbos to be comforted by the neshama Yisera that left.
Okay.
Now, if Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos, that's when you do need besamim, because you need it because of the Shabbos element of it. But you don't need besamim on Mitzvah Yom Kippur. But a fire you do need, even when it falls during the week. It's davar chadash, and it's also to use. It's not similar to other Mitzvah Yom Tovs, and you're not allowed. You don't make a bracha on Mitzvah Yom Kippur on fire that you created now, or a fire that's created from such a fire. But rather, you need a fire that was Shabbos b'malacha. It was lit throughout Yom Kippur. And even though on Mitzvah Shabbos you don't need such a fire, that's because it was created on Mitzvah Shabbos. Fire was created on Saturday night when Hashem showed Adam how to make a fire. Adam took two stones and hit them together and created fire. He made the bracha bar mi'ori ha'esh. So therefore, we recite a bracha Mitzvah Shabbos, even on fire that came now, that you created now, because that's when its creation is. But Mitzvah Yom Kippur, that the reason for the bracha is because you weren't able to have to have fire, to benefit from fire, and now it's permissible. You only recite a bracha on fire that rested, that was lit, and you rested on Yom Kippur, and now you're able to actually use that fire. So now, even if Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos, you also should recite a bracha on a candle that was lit from before Yom Kippur and it rested, to show that this day is Mekudesh, this day is special, that it was Shabbos Mina'ar, that so there's reason even when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos that you should specifically use a candle that rested. Okay. I'm just wondering if what I did was, if reciting a bracha from a Havdallah, from a yahrzeit candle, if that could be a problem. If the yahrzeit candle was just lit, so you'll have a candle to recite Havdallah from, so then it's fine. It's meant for light. It's meant for Havdallah. But if the Havdallah candle was meant for honor,
It didn't rest.
so it wasn't meant for light. So maybe that could be a problem. It was meant for a neshama, it was lit for a neshama. But the Alter Rebbe over here says that you shouldn't recite the bracha on the candles of the Beis HaKnesses, even though they were lit before Yom Kippur, because they were not lit only for the honor of the day and for the honor of the Beis HaKnesses, not to give light. And you're supposed to recite a bracha on fire that's meant to give light. And so he says that what you could do is light a flame from the flame of the Beis HaKnesses that was lit from Erev Yom Kippur, and you can recite the bracha on both the both together. The fire, the candle that was lit to honor the holiday, and or to honor the shul, and the fire that's lit for light, that you lit from it, and you recite the bracha on both. Now, if you can't recite the bracha, fire bracha, on both together, so recite the Havdallah on the candle that you lit from the candles of the Beis HaKnesses that were burning the entire Yom Kippur, and this way you're reciting a bracha on a candle that's lit for light, not on a candle that was lit for honor. And if you did transgress, if you ended up reciting the bracha on the candles of the shul that were, even though they're lit for honor, nevertheless, you don't have to go back and recite a bracha on another candle, because they're also meant for light as well, because they daven with that light. So it seems that if there's an element as well of light in addition to the honor, then it maybe is not a problem. If people, in other words, here it's the honor, they're lit for honoring the Yom Tov. In other words, there's like extra candles they would light. They had light for people to read, but there was extra candles they did for honor. But he says those candles, there really is also an element of light that they have in mind when they light them, or that the candle is meant for. It's meant to give light as well in the shul, because they even daven using, with that light. So therefore, it's not a problem. Now, in the laws of Havdallah,
I guess you need candles in case the electricity goes out too.
Right. That's interesting. Right. And then they didn't have the electricity, but they had like extra light is good. So in the laws of Havdallah, he brings the fire of a Beis HaKnesses. In those days, they would recite the bracha on it if it was if there was a special person there. So they would light in other words, an honorable person. They would have a light there to give him light, or if the shamish would eat there, so that they would have a light for him, and unless there was the moon, unless there was a skylight that he would have for light from the moon. But if there wasn't an Adam Chashuv and there wasn't a shamish, and there's a candle burning there, you don't say the bracha on that candle, because it's meant for honoring the Shechina. It's not meant for light. Therefore, nowadays that we don't have people who that live in the shul, and we don't have a shamish that eats in the shul, you don't say the bracha on the fire, on the candle of the base, on the candle that's in a Beis HaKnesses, because that's meant for honor. It's like the Ner Tamid we're talking about. Something like the Ner Tamid, that little flame that's in front of the ark. So that candle, can you say a Havdallah on it? The problem with that is that it's not meant for light, because there's like no light that comes out of it. It's a tiny little candle. Now, and that light is there by day as well, and therefore, now, if there's many candles, and marbim neiros balayla yoiser mibiyoyim b'shul lahar, if they do have extra light by night, so then you could use it to recite the bracha. So it seems like it's not so simple to say the bracha on this fire from the Beis HaKnesses, but you could light another candle from it. You could light another candle from it. Okay. Anyway, so that gives us a little understanding of halacha connected to this Gemara. And now comes the next question, which has to do with this argument of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So we have an argument over here between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and the Beis Shammai said regarding the person who ate and he didn't bench, does he have to go back and bench if to the place where he originally ate? So Beis Shammai said you have to go back, and Beis Hillel says you don't have to go back. That was the Mishnah. And the Gemara mentioned that first it mentioned explained their debate a little. One of them said, Beis Hillel said, Beis Shammai, really? You have to go back? If a person ate all the way on the top of a tower, he's got to go all the way back up to the top of the tower to bench? He came down. Let him bench, right? You got to make him, he has to go all the way back and bench? So Beis Shammai answers back. He says, well, what about if he left his wallet up there? Would he go back for his wallet? If he would go back for his wallet, so for sure, to honor Hashem, you should go back. So what we see here is that benching in the place where you ate is more of an honor of Hashem. It's an honor. It's a way of honoring Hashem, being that I guess you ate in that place. You're thanking Hashem more. It's more of a thanks because it's more connected to the fact that you ate there. The honor for Hashem would be more applicable to bench over there because that's where you were sustained. That's the place where you had sustenance. So it's kavod shamayim, and Beis Shammai says for kavod shamayim for sure you should go back and do it. And then the Gemara brought stories, and the stories the Gemara brought, they seem to imply like the halachas, like Beis Shammai. What's the story? The first story is that two students. The first story, well, there are two. The stories are about students. The first story is one. He went back. He forgot that he didn't bench. He left, and then he went back, and he followed Beis Shammai like he did like Beis Shammai, and he found a golden purse. Found a golden purse, and sounds like got rewarded for going back and following Beis Shammai. He went back to say the Brochos Hamazon, to say the grace after meal. Sounds like it's a pretty good thing. And we mentioned yesterday a Marsha that says a very interesting point. It says Beis Shammai used in their example about a purse. That's why this person merited to find this purse, this golden purse, because when Beis Shammai said it, it was like had an effect in Shamayim that if someone follows his view, it's there's this they deserve, so to speak, to get this purse, and ultimately he got this arnica de dahava, this golden purse. Then the second story, a second student did what he did was he left the place he was traveling. Let's say and he decided he's not going to bench now. We'll bench later. So he left, and he did like Beis Hillel. He didn't go back, and he did it b'mezid. And the thing is, Achle Arya, a lion ate him. So it sounds like maybe you shouldn't follow Beis Hillel. Now, the only thing is, it's not exactly a good proof, because Beis Hillel did not say their halacha if a person did it intentionally. Beis Hillel said their halacha if you did it mistakenly, the person did it intentionally, you have to go back. So it's not exactly like Beis Hillel. But nevertheless, the Gemara does have an implication, like it's where the first story definitely proves it, and then you have a third story here, where Rabbi Bar Chana was going on a shayara, on a caravan, and it is dangerous to separate oneself from the group, because they, wild animals. There are highway bandits, right? Thank you. So it is dangerous for a person to not go travel with them. Now, so it says that he ate and he forgot he didn't bench. So he said to himself, "What should I do? If I tell them I forgot to bench, they're just going to say, well, bench with us, bench while you're traveling. Bench here where you are." They started traveling. So he said, and they're going to tell him, wherever you bench, you're benching to Hashem. Hashem's everywhere, right? So Hashem can hear you. So he said, let me tell them that I forgot my golden dove. And so he said, wait for a moment, wait for me. I'm going to go back. I just want to go back and get my golden dove that I forgot. So they waited for him. They went. He said Brochos Hamazon over there. He came back, and he found over there a golden dove. So you see that going back is definitely the advisable thing. I would think that this story would be a case where he went beyond the letter of the law and follow Beis Shammai. Yes, Avram. You're muted. We cannot hear you.
Sorry. I always thought that you could bench away from where you ate as long as it was in sight. Is that correct? Which would mean a tower would be in sight.
So
I think I picked that up in a class. But
there is such a thing, that if you can see where you ate. Now, to what extent, I'm not 100% sure. In other words, if you're outside and you ate inside, does that also apply if you look through the window, or is that considered a separate place? I would have to look that.
I remember that was like in the market. If somebody went to the market, he can still join the tree.
Join the Zima. But the person who was benching over there was benching in the right place. This guy was just answering Amen.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that case would be a proof. I'd have to look it up to see. That's a good point. So you're asking us a question over here, because the question is the case of the tower. Well, I guess it's not such a strong question, because obviously the example that he's giving is an example of where you would have to explain that you probably were not able to see the top of the tower. You know what I mean? You could see maybe a little of the area, but you wouldn't see where you ate. In other words, there might be things blocking that you're not able to see. The stairway and so on might be, might block your view of seeing where they ate. So it's not. I can't say it's a strong question on the Gemara, but it would be a question in halacha. To what extent does it mean that you left the place? That's a good question. In other words, is there an area that would be considered leaving the place? Is it totally look. In other words, as long as you can see it, or are there any other restrictions? But in other words, to answer your question, Avram, on the Gemara, I don't know if it's a problem, because even if that is 100% correct, that no matter what, as long as you can see the place, so we would answer that the Rosh Habira, the example that Beis Shammai gives with the top of a tower, would be that you can't really see it from where you are at the top of the tower, and therefore you would have to go up and bench over there. In other words, we would have to be talking about a case where there's something blocking.
The other thing, Rabbi, the other thing I learned was that you can bench outside of where you ate as long as before you ate, you had it in mind that you were going to bench after. Is that true?
So my understanding is that if you have in mind to eat something in that second place, eating something in the second place would allow you to bench in a different place, and that is brought in Shulchan Aruch. That's an interesting halacha, that if you ate something in one place and then you moved places, this whole Gemara there is a qualification to it, and that is that that if you eat something in the next place, then it wouldn't be a problem. You wouldn't have to go back. Here, chapter 184, paragraph 2. Bamed Devarim Amurim. We now qualify what we learned. When does this apply? When you don't have any more bread. If you do have more bread, you can eat more bread in the second place, ma'at, v'yavarech, and you could say the bracha there. Rak shelo yehei ra'ev me'achila rishona. Just you should make sure that you still, you're still within the time frame of being able to bench from the first benching. Make sure not to separate in time too long. But about the intention of would that help if you intend to bench somewhere else, but you're not planning on eating in the second place? That I think could be a problem. Again, I'll try to look it up. It's I would think it should mention it here if that was an option. No, it mentions the option of eating in the second place. Now let's see. Well, let's see if the Mishnah Berurah says something. Now he says even intentionally this works, that you eat bread here a little and you don't have to bench. And go back. You don't have to say a beginning bracha and an end bracha on what you ate before. And after you eat a little more over here, you could say the Birchas HaMazon, and it'll work for both. And it even works when you intentionally left. So it seems like this is an option. And he says, even if you eat less than a kazayas, you only have like a little piece. Nevertheless, it'll join together. But it has to be bread.
Rabbi, a practical application would be a progressive dinner, let's say during Chol Hamoed Sukkos, where you say your before blessing, and then on bread, eat your bread, and then go other places where you might eat only shahakol or mazonos. How does that fit into this?
Yeah, I don't know if that would be a good example, because during in that scenario, you probably should bench first and then leave and do your shahakol somewhere else. In other words, you really should not be leaving, especially because you're going to have a problem. Where are you eating your next bread? If you're, in other words, this whole leniency that I just mentioned. Thank you, Avraham, for bringing it up, because it is brought in Shulchan Aruch, this idea of eating something after in the next place, and this allow, you know, this is sort of like a loophole. We now figured out a way you could go from one place to another, and you know, you didn't bench in the first place, you could bench in the second place. But I don't know that it would work for sukkahs. You get what I'm saying? Because you need to have bread in the next place.
Rabbi, the other thing is that so you're in a restaurant, you're eating bread. You get a call and you've got to leave. So your meal isn't finished. So you take a bit of bread, you know, like half or whatever, and you go to another place and you bench there. Can you do that and you finish your eating in another place?
Right. So I don't think that's an issue because it's in the same room and you can see the other place from where you're sitting.
Yeah,
you know
but
what I'm
even
saying?
if you go outside of that place to another
Oh, you mean
place.
you made a hefsek and now you came back?
Yeah, so you haven't finished your meal, you take bread and you finish it at home, so. Is that?
Wait, so you're going home to finish?
Well, wherever it is, you know,
You're leaving the place because
unfinished meal.
So in other words, you ate half your meal and now you're going somewhere else and you want to finish it somewhere else.
Yeah, so you take a piece of bread with you and
Yeah.
finish the meal.
Finish the meal somewhere
outside.
else. Right. So that seems to be, you know, acceptable. I believe there's somewhere in the Seder Berchas Hanenin from the Alter Rebbe that says, if I remember correctly, it says that this should only be done on you know, that it's not something that a person should do unless there's a reason for it, like a mitzvah. They have to go somewhere to visit someone, or, you know, to someone who's sick, or there's some mitzvah involved. Then you can rely, you can, you know, not bench here and go, you'll bench in another place. Let's say it's Purim Suda. You would go from one place to the next place. So if I remember correctly, there is maybe another opinion that says that you could rely on this specifically in a scenario of a mitzvah. So I'll have to check that. Let me write that down. I'm going to look that up as well. So tzarich mitzvah also, yes, seeing the place. To what extent does that work? And kavana.
Rabbi,
Yes.
suppose I continue the thought of the previous question where let's say you get called away because of an emergency
Right.
and you go to this other place and that's the only and you really do not have time to finish the bench at the first place, but because of an emergency you have to go, let's say, somewhere else. For example, a doctor who's eating and gets called away to the hospital because he has to do some kind of a surgery or something. Can he take, for example, the bread from the place where he studied the Suda, finish it at the other place, and then bench there? That's not for, well, you could say, well, surgery is a mitzvah, but, you know, from my standpoint, it's not a mitzvah in the sense of going to a mitzvah event that we normally associate with a mitzvah. But would that be allowable?
So according to this other view, again, I have to look it up if it does say that. I believe it says that somewhere because I remember such a thing. But so again, from the Mishnah Berurah, it doesn't seem like that's that you even have to worry about this. But if I remember correctly, there is another view. Now, if that's true, that there is such a view, I believe that would be fine, because this would be a tzorech gadol. It would be a very important necessity to you know, as a doctor, he has to heal. I mean, even if it's not a life and death situation, but for sure, if it's a life and death situation, for sure. But even not, it would still be considered a tzorech gadol. It'd still be considered a big necessity. So I think that would be included in the leniency of eating bread the next place and benching. Okay, so that bottom line is we saw some halacha about these laws. So we have an idea at least of some of the practical rulings, or at least what to know is a shaila. Even if a person doesn't know the halacha always, but at least when to ask. What I mean. Knowing these, getting knowledge in these areas are beneficial, even if you don't come to the final conclusion of halacha. Of course, we try to have clarity. It's a special mitzvah to learn Torah with clarity and have the final halacha. It's called Libun Hilchas, or Dalet Amay Shel Halacha. It says that the Shechina rests with his Dalet Amay. So of course, it's great to have the clarity. So we've learned some of the halacha, and hopefully we'll have clarity even on the other questions. Now, the Gemara did mention these three stories, and two of the stories seem to be pretty clear that a person should follow Beis Shammai. Maybe even the middle story, it's a little unclear because he wasn't really following Beis Hillel. He was relying on a leniency that he shouldn't have relied on. But in any event, you do see this idea of following Beis Shammai here, and this person he ended up getting this medal, a special reward. They found this Yoina de Dahava, this golden dove. In the previous story, the other story also he found. So it does seem to be implying the fact that Gemara brings these stories and tells us that these Amoraim, they went back to bench. And so it does sound like maybe the halacha follows Beis Shammai. So there is a Rabbeinu Yoina over here, very famous Rabbeinu Yoina over here, that's brought in halacha. He says, first starts off with the famous question of how could you follow Beis Shammai if we know a story in the earlier in the Gemara where it mentions that someone tried to do Kriya Shema like Beis Shammai, and they told him you're deserving of death. They told him you deserve capital punishment because you shouldn't be following Beis Shammai. You transgressed the words of Beis Hillel. So how does this work? So first thing he says is Yesh Leimar, that it's not similar, because over there, if a person acts in a way that he's following Beis Shammai, that's a problem. He does something that's clear that he's changing his mode in order to act like Beis Shammai. For example, he's standing up, and now it's time to say Kriya Shema at night, so he specifically lies down and says Shema and then gets up. You know what I mean? So it's clear that he's doing things, or even if he doesn't get up afterwards, but it's clear that he's doing it to follow Beis Shammai, and he's transgressing the words of Beis Hillel. But here, even if he goes back, it's not clear that he's going back to follow Beis Shammai. So as long as you don't do an act that's clearly implying that, it's fine. Okay. Then he says regarding the halacha, so he brings that one of the great rabbis, Haskind, or he brings some of the Goinim and Rav Shmuel ben Chofni. They paskin that the halacha follows Beis Shammai, that even if a person by mistake left where, forgot to bench, he has to go back and bench, and they rely on this story that person found a wallet because he followed Beis Shammai. Mashma that's the proper thing to do. And the Rabbeinu Yonah says, but it doesn't seem correct because we clearly said earlier that all the arguments between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the halacha follows Beis Hillel. And the fact that the Gemara brings this story is not to prove that Beis Hillel is wrong here, or we don't follow him in halacha, I should say, but rather to show that if a person wants to go back, he gets special reward for doing it. But not that the halacha follows Beis Shammai. It's just that it's a special thing to do, that it would be advisable to go to do that. So that is the Rabbeinu Yonah. So he brings both views, really. He brings the original view that the halacha follows Beis Shammai, and some of the Goinim paskin that way. The problem with that is that the Gemara earlier said that in all of this chapter, the halacha always follows Beis Hillel, except in one case, and it gives a different case with the sweeping case. But this case, everything's supposed to follow Beis Hillel. So how could you say that the halacha follows Beis Shammai here? It must be that the halacha follows Beis Hillel. And Gemara brings the story to show that Beis Hillel agrees that it's nicer if you do it, but to go back and say the bracha, but it's not something that you're obligated to do. I'm just thinking back, the earlier question that he asked of person following Beis Shammai, how are you allowed to follow Beis Shammai? I think the answer that he gave, it's a little unclear from his wording, but I think what he's emphasizing is here, Beis Hillel agrees that if a person wants to be machmir, they can. So you're not transgressing their word. So the emphasis of Rabbeinu Yonah is not that it looks like, it's interesting because the way he starts off, he's implying that the emphasis is that if a person was standing, or if a person intentionally changes their mode, it's transgressing Beis Hillel. But here, if a person wants to be machmir, they can, because even Beis Hillel agrees. So the main point is that Beis Hillel allows you to follow Beis Shammai because they agree that it's meshubach, it's a honorable thing to do, and therefore the understanding of the stories according to Rabbeinu Yonah is that it's following Beis Hillel's view. Again, the Gemara is unclear who is the halacha following. We had a previous Gemara that says that the whole chapter, the halacha follows Beis Hillel. On the other hand, we have a story here that seems that the Gemara is telling us the halacha follows Beis Shammai. So according to some opinions, yeah, that's the halacha follows Beis Shammai. Now you got to answer, well, what about the previous Gemara that said that in this whole chapter, the halacha follows Beis Hillel? So I mentioned to you that there is a Taisvis earlier that says that really the halacha follows Beis Shammai in this case as well. The only thing is the Gemara doesn't say that the halacha follows Beis Shammai here. Doesn't say this is an exception, because even Beis Hillel agrees that you don't have to. That they agree that it's better to go back. So in this case, it's not a typical argument, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and therefore the Gemara didn't. When it said the whole chapter, the halacha follows Beis Hillel, and it excludes only one case, it doesn't exclude this case also. The reason is because this is a different category. This case is not the typical category of an argument, because Beis Hillel agrees to a certain extent with Beis Shammai. They say it's better to follow, it's better to do what Beis Shammai says, and therefore doesn't exclude it, but really the halacha follows Beis Shammai. So you have two ways of learning here, that either the halacha follows Beis Hillel, the halacha follows Beis Shammai, and it would seem the difference might be what happens after the fact. In other words, if a person missed out benching, and they said they planned on benching in the next place they go, do they have to, they did it intentionally. What do we tell them then? Well, then of course you have to go back. You intentionally left. But what happens if they benched in the place where they left to? So they already benched in the second place. What do we tell them then? Is your benching worthless? You got to go back and bench a second time? That's the question. So if the halacha follows Beis Hillel, there's room to say that maybe Beis Hillel would say that your benching is okay. If the halacha follows Beis Shammai, then it would seem that the benching is worthless. It's like a bracha of Havdallah, and you would have to go back and bench again. So this is an area of it's brought in the Torah, in the Beis Yosef, the Torah. The Torah brings this down, and the Torah says that whoever ate and left their place, he didn't bench, it doesn't matter if they left b'shogeg or b'mezid, they have to go back and bench. You have to go back. Even if you left b'shogeg. Who does it sound like? That sounds like Beis Shammai, right? You have to go back. In your shogeg, you left by mistake. That sounds like it's following Beis Shammai. And then it says if you benched in the second place, if you were a shogeg, it's okay, you were yotze. But if you were a mezid, you didn't fulfill your obligation. That means if you intentionally left without benching, your benching is now worthless. And now the Beis Yosef says that in the Seder Rav Amram, they paskin like Beis Shammai. Rabbeinu Yoina brings b'shem the Goinim that they paskin like Beis Shammai, but the Rambam holds like Beis Hillel, and Rabbeinu Yoina himself holds like Beis Hillel. And the Rambam says, if even b'mezid, you have to go. If you benched in the place where you remembered, or if you benched the second place, you did fulfill your obligation contrary to the Torah. Now, he brings over here that it seems that the Torah is paskening like Beis Shammai. And that's what I was telling you, because even if you made a mistake, you forgot, you have to go back and bench. Now, he says that what does Beis Shammai hold? So Beis Shammai holds that if you made a mistake, you got to go back and bench. Now, what would be a case of a mezid? What would be the difference between shogeg and mezid? So he says it must be that even Beis Shammai, the difference between person made a mistake or did it intentionally would be if your benching is worthless or not. But the Rambam holds that the halacha follows Beis Hillel, and therefore he says if you benched by mistake or on purpose, you left that place on purpose and went to the second place, and you benched in the second place, according to the Rambam, you're going to fulfill your obligation. Because the halacha is like Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel says that you're supposed to go back. If you didn't, okay, you benched. Now, the other issue that has to be dealt with here is, what are we talking about? Only benching Berchas Hamazon, or also Al Hamichya as well? And is it only Al Hamichya and benching, or is it also Al HaPeiros as well? So there's a three-way argument between what we're specifically talking about. But this really covers this discussion. And in the Mishnah Brura, Kuf Pei Dalid, the way it's paskined in the Shulchan Aruch now. So that's the Torah. The Torah is the son of the Rosh, and the way it's paskined in the Shulchan Aruch. If a person Yotzim Kaima, he left and he didn't bench, if he went on purpose, he has to go back and bench. And if he benched where he remembered he was Yotze, it seems like he's paskening like the Rambam. Now, the Ramah says, and this is only according to the Rambam, but according to the Rosh, that even b'shogeg you have to go back. So b'mezid, you're not Yotze. And he says now then so the Ramah adds in the opinion of the Rosh. So that's the first point. And then he says, now what happens b'shoigeg? You left a place you forgot. So according to the Rambam, no problem. You bench where you are. According to Rabbeinu Yoina in the Rosh, you have to go back to the place because according to the Rosh, you have to go back because the halacha follows base Shammai. That's why you'd have to go back. Now, the Mishnah Berurah over here. He does mention that if by going back, you're going to have a problem because it's going to be too late to bench, then better just bench where you are. So anyway, bottom line, linyan halacha, he said the achroinim hold that you don't have to go back even if you're mazid. They seem to follow the Rambam. Yoitza b'diavad. So it seems like the final halacha is b'diavad. You're okay. Okay. Bottom line is, try to bench where you ate. Don't get into these situations. And I think we covered a lot of halacha over here on the page. I think we're ready to move forward in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow. Sei gesund, everyone. See you later.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. See you later.